Welcome. I hope you are having a wonderful night, dear viewer. Tonight, I will be telling some terrifyingly scary stories. Make sure to leave your feedback on the comments, so I can make this the best experience for you. And if you have any stories you would like me to tell, you can send them through the link in the description. Let's begin. Story 1. My earliest memory was being warned by my mother to never venture into the woods behind our house after dark. Beware, only evil lies beyond the horizon. As I grew older, I questioned why the woods were so dangerous at night. Mother would never elaborate, and simply insisted that it was best to remain ignorant. At night, I would gaze out of my bedroom window at the dark trees that lay so close. I swear I'd see a shadow moving in the darkness, but perhaps it was only a deer. Early one morning, I was jolted from my sleep by screams. I looked out the window and saw a crowd of townspeople, hollering in agitation at the edge of the forest. I watched in confusion as several townspeople came out of the woods, with the small corpse of my friend Jeremy draped over their shoulders. Fool. My mother chided me later that day. He ought to have known better not to go out into the woods after dark. She then turned to me with a pained expression, as if the death of your father wasn't enough. I glanced at the sole portrait of my father above the mantel. A small, slim man with wavy hair. He'd been killed when I was just a baby. When I became a young man, my older cousin Marcus became the sheriff. Hungry with ambition, he sought to prove himself. I say we take up weapons and kill that murdering psycho who has terrorized our town for 20 years. He shouted one night at our small town's bar. Many in attendance agreed that the time had come to seek vengeance for the dead. A hunting party was formed. We gathered at the edge of the woods, rifles held high, but I hesitated. My mother's warning rang in my ears. I couldn't do it. My cousin gave me a disappointed look and then marched in with the rest of the men. We waited by the edge of the woods all night, but the men never returned. At one time, I thought I heard a distant scream, but perhaps it was only the wind. Dawn came. The time had come. I and a few others ventured into the woods under the safety of daylight, and soon returned, carrying the bodies of the slain men. Marcus's body was the last to be found. I collapsed when I found it butchered on the forest floor. That night, preparations were made for the mass funeral. The press arrived a day later, but answers were in short supply, and no one dared search the woods at night. For days, I sat in my house boiling with anger. The bloody face of Marcus burned into my memory. Had I only gone with them, perhaps. The days turned to weeks. The full moon rose one night, and my rage boiled over. I grabbed my rifle and entered the woods, with only the light of the moon to guide me. I could barely see as I ventured deeper into the chilling darkness. I cursed myself for forgetting a flashlight in my fury. Nearly blind, I felt out with my hand, swiping helplessly for something to grab, and then I saw a light in the darkness. It was a small fire. I pushed forward and entered the clearing. Crouched by the fire, but somehow still shrouded in shadow, was my father. He gazed up at me, and his lips parted to show a row of jagged, blood-stained teeth. I've been waiting for you. Story 2. Do you love your family? Do you really? Think about it. Take a moment and walk with me. Family is forever. Family is a group of people that are supposed to love, guide, and protect you. So people have said, family is bound to you for eternity by blood. With how many people that had to come together to make you just you. You're drowning in blood, sweetie. And so am I. My family was on a different level of fucked up. My father was a car salesman who got high off of crack cocaine and screwed his coworker, smiling in the faces of his neighbors who whisper about his sexuality behind his back, while he's thinking he has everyone fooled. Idiot. My mother wasn't innocent. In fact, she was worse than my dad. To everyone else, She was the unassuming second grade teacher who went to church every Sunday and attended a book club with her friends. Fucking liar. She was horrible. A righteous bitch who would get friendly with her brother after her husband went to sleep. Beat me with her precious brown leather Bible in hand whenever I took too long doing the dishes. She would lock me in the basement for hours and hours. She once left me in there from the crack of dawn to the middle of the night. And when she let me out, she smiled in my face and told me, "I honestly forgot you were there." I begged for food, but she told me it was too late to cook, and she shouldn't have to waste food on me. Waste. My older brother got the better treatment from my family. My father and mother didn't beat him like they would beat me. They didn't starve him like they would starve me. He stayed in his room on his computer, shirtless, sometimes while he talked smoothly to some man or woman on the other side of his camera. The money he got for his comm sessions got him weed, white rum, and a car that he didn't have the license for. Bought secondhand from a friend from somewhere in Chicago. Regardless of the law, he would take it out to practice. He didn't care for my curled up, screaming, and scared self, who he threw into the trunk of his car. He would drive around for hours and speed up when he saw a speed bump in the road, then laugh as he heard me cry in pain. That's how I broke my arm. This was all before I turned 7. Just so you have a better image of how messed up this story gets. Are you ready? It was a cool Tuesday afternoon. My backyard was covered in leaves. Orange, yellow, red. I had just turned 15 and it was the middle of autumn. I was alone as I sat on the back porch steps. Not just alone on the steps, but there was no one else home. It was so peaceful. The kind of peace you wish would never go away. But good things never last long, do they? I could hear my mother's heels clicking up the sidewalk as she got to the house. Her loud laughter let me know that she was on the phone, and she only ever genuinely liked talking to one person on the phone, my uncle. With her keys jingling in the lock, it was such a smooth transition for me to close the back door and hop up to my room. My house had no pictures. The walls weren't ever decorated with anything, and it always smelled of something foul. No one in this house ever thought to make memories. Everyone was too busy trying to forget. But forget what? It's not like they've been suffering. I've been the lightning rod for them for as long as I've been breathing, but there is no pity for me. Just abuse. Passing my brother's room, it now had the permanent smell of weed and burnt rubber. I made sure to move quickly and quietly when I passed his room. His attention on me was never good, as I've learned over the years. How do you explain to someone that you've created tactics to move around your house, just so you won't have to be noticed by your family? All for the sake of your own safety, your life. How do you explain that? You can't. Or at least that's what you're taught when you're young. Your mother's scolding you for tattling and telling you to keep your mouth shut. Whatever happens in the family stays in the family. Snitches get stitches, my brother would say. I hated my brother. I would always have to escape to my room whenever they came home. I would always have to hide, listening carefully at the door for anyone in the hall so I could run to the bathroom without being noticed, watching which floorboard I stepped on at night on my way to the kitchen, sleeping with my alarm clock under my pillow to get an earlier start so I could avoid everyone else, taking showers at the break of dawn where everyone was still too deep in sleep to be disturbed by the sound of spraying water. When they were home, there was no such thing as peace. But I will get to the point. That Tuesday night was the night that my worldview changed entirely. Humans are naturally wired for survival. You do what you must do to keep breathing. But you can only handle so much before you snap. My mother had decided to throw a party. It started from the middle of the afternoon and went on late into the night. My father, mother, and brother all sat in the living room with our neighbors, and looking at them, you could almost trick yourself into believing they were perfectly normal. They laughed, smiling politely, and entertained their guests as everyone drank and ate gross goat cheese on saltine crackers. But of course, I knew better. My father wasn't fooling anyone with that long sleeve he was wearing. He was trying to hide the point of entry, all while looking sleep-deprived and waifish. The veins at the sides of his forehead were bulging with the need to run to the bathroom and just do one more line. To get through the evening and I'll quit. My mother's liver was giving out. She was once skinny with gentle curves, like a supermodel if she twisted her body in the mirror long enough to fool herself. Now she was as bloated as a whale. None of her clothes no longer fit, and she had to go out and buy a new wardrobe. My uncle's sitting next to her, but he entertained her neighbor from next door instead, laughing flirtatiously and laying his hand on her knee. Our neighbor flirted back with him, tossing her hair over her shoulder and batting her lashes. Our neighbor was married to a Marine, and my brother, sitting with his friends all drinking beer and talking as if they had anything to talk about. None of them had jobs. None of them had families to take care of. None of them had shit to do with their lives, except mooch off their parents. They could only talk about memories from high school, which quickly got them bored. Then they were reduced to only sitting in silence while everyone else talked to them about their own lives. I sat in my room, avoiding them all. Those idiots, sadists, adulterers, and liars. Every one of them is the next person's paramour in one way or another. By the time the party had died, it was 12 o'clock. I knew it wouldn't be a good night, based on how hard my mother stomped up the steps. I saw from my window my uncle escaping to my neighbor's house, his hand on her ass as she giggled drunkenly. My mother has fell out of favor. Funny. She screamed my name and demanded that I come and clean up her mess, moving down the hall to my room. It was like a horror movie, her slow steps moving closer and closer to my door. My arms folded over the windowsill as I took in the cold night air. I can still remember the feel of the wind on my face. My door was thrown open by my mother, her long hair hanging in front of her face as she desperately onto her wine glass. She stumbled and swayed in the doorway. Her eyes couldn't even find me. She yelled for me to come down and clean up her mess again. My brother yelling from his room for her to shut up. As I looked at her, as I watched her, I got this strange feeling, a feeling that could only be described as sadistic, but also empty at the same time. It was like a dying candle in the wind, a wind that just kept on coming. Her eyes found mine, and she stumbled into the room as she took a sip from her wine glass. She called my name, and when I didn't respond, that began an onslaught of insults and threats. The same insults and threats that I've heard for all of the time I had been under her care. It wasn't anything new. Her mocking, taunting, vicious insults were nothing new to me anymore. The wind stopped, and the light on the candle flickered back to life. With plenty of wax left, it was like a wave of clean, fresh water was thrown on me. I stood up, my eyes scanning her blubbery form from her heel to the crown of her head. She did just the same, mocking me as the wine in her glass sloshed around, provoking me with her words. My brother screamed from his room for both of us to be quiet. Fine, I'll make her be quiet. I lunges quickly, pushing her onto the floor. Her size betrayed her. She was too big now to move quickly. She struggled to stand as I calmly walked to my bedroom door and locked it. Her wine glass had fell out of her hand, and the cup broke. The smell of Riesling coated the dull brown carpet, mixing in evenly with the foul smell of the house. One tall shard of glass laid near my feet. I picked it up and made my way over to my mother. The candle was burning bright now that the wind had finally stopped. An easy slit across her throat prevented her from screaming too. The shard cut my own fingers as I made myself into a butcher for my pig of a mother. I had felt this wave of ease come over me as I stood over her now mutilated body. I heard my brother's door open. With every step he took to get to my room, memories flashed behind my eyelids. His abuse and torment, his cruelty. Every step brought a new memory back, and soon enough he was banging at my door. There weren't enough steps to match how many times he'd broken my arm or fractured my ribs. There weren't enough steps to match how many hours a day I'd spend in the darkness of his trunk. I'd remember the summer, in the darkness, him zooming over a speed bump, me hitting my head and blacking out. He threw me on the front lawn when we got home. did even bother to take me inside, but instead left me under the bleeding hot sun, watching as my mother's body emptied out her blood, soaking into the carpet as her face is fitted perfectly into a look of pain and fear. Strangely enough, it's the prettiest she's ever looked. My brother continued to bang on the door, banging continuously, and demanded that I open the door. So I did, and I delivered the same gruesome death to him too, a slit across his throat. But instead of cutting him open, I beat him until every bone I could get to was broken, stomping on his arms and legs hard with my foot. I'd taken a page from his book and aimed for the most vital areas. The wind stayed down. I dragged the shard of glass on the wall, cutting into the dirty blue wallpaper. Then I noticed something. I didn't hear my father come up the steps, nor did he complain about the noise my mother was making. I searched house for him, just to see if he was even home, passing through the living room that was messy with cheap wine and gross snacks. Pillows thrown about and furniture moved across the room to make space for a dance area. I saw the guest bathroom light on. The door was cracked open and I could see a shadow. I got close to the bathroom and saw the dirty brown loafers my father wore. Then his legs that were stretched out in front of him that almost peeked out the door. Pushing open the door, I saw his body laying against the sink. A lighter sat by his bent knee, a burnt spoon in one hand and a syringe still jammed into his left arm. His tie was laying crumpled up next to the lighter, and he wasn't breathing. It was bound to happen sooner or later. How convenient that it should be now. I left him there. The state of his own demise should left alone. It's the only thing he had in his final moments. Weakness and addiction. I made my way out the open back door, kicking it closed with my foot, walking around the side of the house as I wiped off my fingerprints from the shard of glass. I made my way over to the neighbor's house. She didn't even have the decency to close her living room curtains. My uncle pumping himself into her as she had her legs spread open on either side of her husband's recliner. If only she knew where this pig had stuck his cock into. I threw the shard of glass into her rose bushes and continued on down the sidewalk. I'm sure you're wondering now what happened. Did the police find me? Where did I run to? Do I feel guilty? Sweetheart, it made national news. It was everywhere. A brother had killed his sister and her entire family after a night of partying with her neighbors. The weapon was found in the rose bushes of a neighbor of his sister's just across the street from the house they were murdered in. Both their faces were plastered on 5 o'clock news. He pled his innocence, but texts between him and his sister were leaked, and their incestuous relationship was revealed to the public. The neighbor wasn't off the hook either. The police guessed he killed them out of rage and jealousy sometime after the party, and went to go make a victim of the adulterous neighbor lady. It's amazing how easily people can be fooled. It's also amazing how easily someone can obtain a fake ID, and a fake birth certificate, and a fake birth certificate, and a fake passport. Cutting hair is easy as well. Isn't that what people do anyways when they want to feel like a new person? Now for the last question. Do I feel guilty? No, absolutely not. In fact, during the whole ordeal, from pushing my mother to the floor to walking off into the night, the only thing I could feel was relief. It's the feeling of being raised in a cage and then finally breaking free. Sweet, sweet freedom. So no, I don't feel the slightest bit guilty. Never even for the neighbor lady who made a stupid decision and cheated with the wrong man. I do not feel guilty. Besides, if you had the chance to kill your demons, I'm sure you would do the same. You're already drowning in blood. What's the difference if you spill more? Story 3. I was my dad's only child. For most daughters, your dad is your gauntlet, your perpetual steel curtain. But what happens when the shield instead becomes the dagger? When you're 6, you'll do what you have to in order to survive, because running away is not an option. I knew it was coming. No revelation here. It was Friday night, and once night had spread its jam across the horizons, and it was only my mother and I. The dreaded routine of beatings and grasping at the straws of futility had turned clocks into time bombs. Tick, tick, tick. It was on its way, but I didn't know when until Mama spoke. "Go, Lily. Go sit in the closet and wait for me." My mother was a Cuban immigrant with nothing but courage flowing through her veins. Still, I never understood at the time what a restraining order was, nor why it could so easily be broken. When the rattling old engine's thrumming oscillated the floorboards and potent, gagging exhaust fumes began to flow through the vents, I could only recoil and grit my teeth. Evasion was my only defense. Predicting the level of his rage depended on the force of the car door slamming, so when it audibly shattered the driver's side window, I knew undoubtedly that the oncoming storm would be a dam breaker. As a child, my anxiety would render me motionless and stiff. A spider flash lit in a corner. I couldn't will my brain into making split decisions for myself. So when the door was being kicked in, hinges on the fray, and the immutable words, "Helena. Helena. Helena, you bitch." That door better be unlocked. Seeped through the wall's invisible pores, I was rendered icebound in a primordial stasis of terror, even if running was the best choice. As the inevitable, gruesome point of contact raced to its apex, I'd masterfully dissociated from my body by focusing on 2 ants on the floor carrying piles of potato chip crumbs. When the thud of my mother's body hit the kitchen floor, I was restrained into a sort of cosmic blur. The lumbering insect's spherical armor became magnified under my icy stare, and all I could fantasize about was my own incorruptible cloak of armor. If only I could unwittingly escape the horrors inevitable to come by staring at a scrape on the wall or a dent in the bureau, and imagine myself watching from the other side of the room to cope until it ended, every single time. As for Mother, this night, no words were uttered. "Lily, baby, Daddy's home. Come out and Daddy won't be mad." Muscles tensed agonizingly tight. I was petrified, stuffed, and mounted over Hell's Mantle. Tears streaming down my cheeks. I'd learned to cry silently. The stumbling, uneven footsteps on the first floor told me he was more inebriated than usual. And also, it told me that Mom was really hurt. Usually, she'd fight him with every fiber of her being on his way to the staircase. Despite it, always resulting in bloodshed. And then, 1, 2, 3. The footsteps creaked up the steps. "Lily, here I come. Better be special for me tonight. Be a good girl and come out." Mom always instructed me to hide in different places, but never ever told me to just leave. The internal force of my inability to react and the external evil of my impending doom had me feeling what was most familiar to me and most alien to my peers at school. Acceptance. At only 6 years old, I was already prepared to die. 4, 5, almost up the steps. I was a caged lizard under a descending hand, wanting so terribly to escape. To harness the bravery to run to the bathroom and hide behind the curtain, but too frightened to act on it. Why couldn't I be a brave little girl? "Mommy, if ghosts exist, then please do something." Then that inevitable snapping of the broken top step. He's here. Dad was at the top of the steps, the bathroom, the shower curtain. Hide in plain sight. Do it, Lily. It's your only chance. The first place he'll look is the closet. I was screaming inside. Then I heard the bathroom door slowly creak open, steps moving inside, and the shower curtain, metal against metal. He'd ripped it off the hinges. No Lily there. Where could she be? Where did Mommy hide you this time? Sweating, heart racing, fingers running up and down the delicate skin of my belly, brushed over the softness of my feeble, brittle little arms, over top of the already existing fault and fracture of years bygone, an artistic masterpiece of scars without rhyme, reason, or compassion. How much worse will it get? How much more blood would I lose once again? Dad was just outside the bedroom, and then the footsteps halted, right outside the door. By the sound of the metal against the hollow door, I knew tonight he had a bat. Broke my legs with it once. I began to grip and tear at my clothes, pull at my thinning hair, and finally, I couldn't hold them in any longer. I began crying profusely, and in an effort to merely survive, even if it meant bruises, lacerations, or even disfigurement, I stood up and got ready to step out into the shadow of the indomitable, paternal nemesis bearing down on me. Growing in the darkness like a flatteron at dusk, ready to take the whipping, beating, or worse, that thing which would awaken me in sweat from my nightly terrors. If baby girls in the closet, come out. Come out wherever you are. I'd accepted my fate, even rationalized it as simply the divine nature of karmic disaster, which has always spun in my orbit. It would always be this way. Why? The Lord works in mysterious ways. And then a dull, audible tack noise exploded across the house, and the floor shook loose ceiling plaster from a loud slam. Dad was so drunk, he'd fallen over. Maybe now I could run, but I couldn't get my legs to move. And then the visual of my mom's bloody corpse flashed in my mind. And miraculously, something imperceptible jogged loose my conscious will, and I sprung up and ran. I pushed out of the closet and sprinted to the door, prepared to jump over Dad's half-conscious body, evade the grappling swoop of his arm, and escape out the back door. But as I approached the door, I was halted in my tracks. Standing in the hallway was my mother, unharmed and untouched, and at her feet, Dad's lifeless body with an axe in his back. I gazed up at my mother with watery eyes in wonder and astonishment, and when her eyes met mine, she said the sweetest thing to ever fall upon my ears. "Mama found a good hiding spot, baby. Daddy's never gonna hurt you again.